Welcome to the Spent the Rent podcast. I am your host, Patty Rose. My guest today is an applicant for the vacant Eugene City Council seat in Ward 7, Daniel Isaacson. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for doing this. It's Black Friday, so we had talked about doing this a while ago, and this is my first free weekend since the forum. Let me talk about that a little bit, and then we'll get into why we're here. So the Eugene Tenants Association hosted a candidate forum at Alluvium, and yourself and Joel Aboa were the two candidates that at that time had thrown their name in the hat. It was pretty early in this process. It was a very substantive forum. Ultimately, you were the victor of the straw poll at that event, and those results were given to the council as a recommendation. Joel Aboa has since removed his name from consideration, but there are now 9 more applicants, one of whom is my good friend Thomas Shida. Shout out to Thomas. And on or around December 12th, there will be a vote by the city council to declare the new appointment for the seat vacated by the recent recall. I wanted to have you on because I was impressed with your passion for the city of Eugene. And though this is not an endorsement, I live in Springfield anyway, I wanted to give a chance to chat with you about what got us here. So first of all, let's talk about who you are and why you decided to throw your name in the applicant pool. So in your words, who is Daniel Isaacson?
That's a long question. I grew up in Oregon. I grew up in Southern Oregon, and moved to Eugene, went to school here, moved to Chicago, and I came back from Chicago, kind of chasing a dream and a chance to come back home. I basically tried to get back to Oregon the minute I left, and I was probably way too trusting in the people that I kind of connected up with to come back home. And so it's created a fairly large hole and burden for me to kind of climb out of, but also gave me a different direction and path in my life that's focused on mental health care and suicide prevention and advocacy in that realm that really hadn't had a whole lot of people with big mouths and microphones to talk about it. So that's where I've tried to make a difference as best I can.
Yeah, at that forum, which was really neat, I had no idea what I was doing. Kevin Cronin organized it, and among there's other people involved, but Kevin was definitely one of the main people, pushing for that event. He asked me if I wanted to co-host, and I said I wasn't clear with what he was even trying to put together. And he's like, "This is going to be good. You can just host, which means you'll introduce the moderators, and then you can get out of the way, and then you'll know, and then next time you'll be more helpful." And I was like, it's so incredible in Eugene how there's that reality, how it's like, I want you to be part of this. And you're like, well, I don't know how. And they're like, well, then just hang out like a apprentice. And then the next time you'll learn more. And then, give it 5 years and you'll be the one hosting these.
I hope they do this. I hope they do that all the time for every race going forward. I think I never saw those before. So it was a great opportunity.
It was an amazing event considering how, you were in person. And Joel Aboa was remote. I think he was in Texas doing work.
Yeah.
So he was on this big movie screen and you were on stage. And if you were there, it was pretty wild to watch. Oh no, I think that there's going to be a lot of those kind of forums, and I'd like to host some as well. Now we're going to talk a little bit later about what happened with the recall in your words. And we'll talk about that a little bit and why we're here. But basically for anybody that's completely unaware, there has been a recall in Ward 7. They had to get enough signatures, and then there was a vote, and then the vote was just for that ward. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That part? Okay. Yeah. So the people in that area of Eugene voted to remove Claire Surrett. Am I saying that right?
Yep.
Yeah. So like I said, I wanted to get into stuff first, and then we'll come back around and we'll talk about that. So you had mentioned 2 areas, working with mental health and working with suicide prevention. Shout out to Sarah Schofield. She's been on my show multiple times. And she works tirelessly with suicide prevention. So let's break down each one at a time. So let's start with NAMI. First of all, NAMI stands for National Alliance of Mental Health. You're the president of the Lane County chapter. Tell me about NAMI, what it is NAMI does, and why that work is so important.
So NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and it's the largest grassroots mental health advocacy group in the country, and here in Lane County especially. And so while some NAMI chapters actually provide direct patient care or client care. We don't do that. We provide a good resource for folks who are trying to learn about particular mental illnesses, find other people who have kind of shared experiences, and a pathway for either yourself or a loved one. So, for example, if you have someone in your family who's diagnosed with bipolarism, it's a great opportunity to come and read from the library about what it is, maybe join a support group for other family members, or if you're suffering from a particular affliction, it allows you a really non-threatening way to kind of flush that out, and really bring down and dismantle the stigma around mental illness. It's a bizarre notion that we have in this country that we treat every other body part in our system as flesh and water and meat, and that can go bad, and treat it with medicine. But suddenly the gray matter between our ears, if it starts to have an issue, we blame people for having it, or pretend that it doesn't exist. It's just a totally bizarre scenario. So that's where I kind of wanted to focus on my journey with my friend's passing, and make that my life cause.
And that kind of segues into the suicide prevention stuff. You're talking about losing a loved one. What is it that made that specific? I mean, well, first of all, with NAMI, before we move on, can you get into a little more depth about what is it that I mean, is it something people can reach out to them if they're having issues? What is it that NAMI seeks to do?
NAMI seeks to be the focal point for the conversations regarding mental illness in our county. So it provides a gateway for people who are themselves afflicted or family members to have some other connection to other people, and to know where to go with their thoughts or concerns or questions. Again, we don't do patient care, so it's not a scenario where you can come in and be treated by a psychologist, for example.
But there's resources, I'm sure, on the website of where you could go, and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And I love the idea of for family members. I think it's obviously when the patient themselves, there's the issues there, but then as far as for family members, it's not just with mental health; it's with things that are surrounding mental health, like alcoholism, drug abuse, those kind of things that a lot of times people just need to know there's support systems in place. And so it's probably, I'm sure that on NAMI's website, there's resources to all of that. So that's great. Now your work, you're the co-chair of the Suicide Prevention Coalition. And let's talk about that a little bit. And I mean, again, Sarah Schofield is, I think, involved. I don't know if that's specific. It is that coalition, correct?
Yeah. She's one of the first people I met when I joined in 2018. I joined it after my friend died by suicide. He was my best friend. I'd known him since high school, and he died in a very public way. It was an officer-involved shooting, and I didn't know near as much as I do now. I mean, I tell people all the time, I'm not an expert in mental health, but I am an expert in my own story. I was there, and how we all had processed his death in the minutes and hours and weeks and months and years afterward was incredibly unhealthy. And it led us to TIP, which I can talk about in a little bit. But, when you have press calling you on your phone minutes after you've been told that he's died, you have to clean up the crime scene yourself. You have to call his kids and let them know that their father is dead. His parents get really awkward questions, because when you have a friend or a family member who's passed away from cancer, the first reaction that people give you is empathy, right? It's, oh my God, I'm so sorry, right? If you have somebody who's passed from an officer-involved shooting, the first thing you get is judgment. You get people saying, well, what do you do, right? And so ultimately what happens is that you just, from exhaustion, you try to alter the story a little bit or massage the details, just because you don't want to go into it with every person who talks to you about it, right? And then you do this cycle of guilt in your head that am I being true to his story by and to him by numbing it, and am I a bad friend for doing that? So there's like this constant self-guilt that just recycles in your life forever. and it's just an absolutely horrible experience. I wouldn't wish it on anybody.
Well, and I think with suicide, I think there's a lot of people have strong opinions as defense mechanisms. You know, sometimes people want to look at it like it's a revenge act, or it's you're hurting the people that are left, which, I mean, that may be true, but that doesn't mean that it was an intentional act to hurt those people in the moment. You know, we don't know what's going through somebody's head. Yeah, I mean, suicide, I've personally, my mom had, I've been very vocal about this on my podcast. My mom had multiple attempts to take her own life when I was a kid, and she died, you know, suddenly. And a year before she died, she had another attempt. And then when she finally did pass, it was from like a brain aneurysm or a heart attack. Is what we didn't do an autopsy, because to me, I was like, I already knew that this was coming, like regardless of why she died, you know. And I know that in those moments, like you talk about, media and even people's curiosity, they want to know how, they want to know the details of the grisly stuff. And I don't know why necessarily that's not the story. That's not really what the person's life was about. Not the last 10 seconds of their life. You know, there was so much more to it. So I've been very vocal about that. And then as far as mental health, I mean, I haven't really outwardly said this yet, but I recently got on anxiety medication for the first time, which is something that has been extremely beneficial to me. And I'm lucky, because I've heard that you have to try to take 10 different, you know, 4 different things before you might find the right one. Mm-hmm. And I think that what I'm doing is real mild. It's a serotonin booster, because I've had so many years of having just being hard on myself that I've not been able to produce the proper levels of serotonin. At least that's where we're at with it now. Because I mean, this is the science. There's a lot of science there, but it's also just kind of throwing something at the wall and seeing what sticks for each person. We don't know fully what the right answer is for everyone, you know, for mental health, because there isn't.
There isn't a one shoe, you know, fits all approach here. It really is individualized. Jonah Hill has a really great show on Netflix about his mental health journey, and it's he decided to basically create a movie out of his experience with his therapist, and it's really fascinating. You should check that out.
I watched some of it. I was falling asleep, because even though on the podcast I go by Patty Rose, Rose was my mom's last name. Stutz is my last name, so the movie is called Stutz. And I was just like, what? Because even though it's not a super uncommon name in Germany or Austria or Hungary, then it's rare that I would see it in the States, you know. So I started watching it because people were sending that to me, and I watched a little bit, and then I fell asleep because it was really, you know, soothing. But it's great. It's great. I saw this clip with him and his mom where he was like, this is an open floor. Mm-hmm. His mom and him and his therapist. And his mom was talking about her perception of an incident and his perception of an incident and how different they are. And they were both like, oh, that's super interesting. Instead of like, no, this didn't work for me the way I wanted it to. They were both willing to. I say this a lot to my stepmom about heartache she's had with my brother over the years, who also has passed on. And I just said, sometimes you have to remember that he has a difficult time seeing you as you're his stepmom, like a possessive his stepmom, and then you're also Melanie, right? You need to remember that he struggles with being able to separate that you are two different things, that you have two different roles, and that in every situation that you have a role, and you know, you have to do both of those sometimes at the same time, you know. And so it's really difficult. I thought it was really powerful. Yeah, it's very good. I highly recommend people watch it, and I'm gonna have to watch it again. But it's cool that there's conversations like this happening more and more. And I think that's really good. And I think that gets us, you know, we'll go back to talking about the city council seat. And this is one of the things I think is really good about you putting your name in there, because you can wrap this up first, but I think it's really good that you're talking about mental health, that you're doing a lot of work behind the scenes with it, because we're going to talk about the issues that Eugene faces, homelessness, drugs, all that kind of stuff. Mental health is number one. It is. Know, it's like, it's above homelessness. You know, and so, but before we wrap that up,
common denominator, and that the problem is that it is not a local problem, and it's a national problem. We're last in funding in Oregon, in mental health funding. In 1975, we had 7,600 hospital beds for the psychiatrically needing, right? 7,600 hospital beds. We have 628 now, for a population that's doubled in size. And our drug of choice that we've picked up is methamphetamine, which is a psychosis-inducing drug. So we have more people choosing a drug that's going to cause the very issue, the very beds that we need, and we have 90% less beds for what population we had 20 years, 40 years ago.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think? I mean, it's because this is a blue state, right? And so, I mean, it's historically, but why do you think that is that we've?
For a couple of reasons. One, on the national side, it was the Reagan administration just completely decimated mental health funding, and we never returned to it. I think that a lot of people watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and watched the horrors of how we treated people in asylums and how we treated people in hospitals, and kind of recoiled rightly, right? It was horrific. And so they wanted to get to a different system, but we didn't create the system, right? All we did was create an invisible asylum. And its walls are the jail, the ER, and your doorstep. Yeah. And any notion that what we have now is a more sympathetic and less cruel system than what we had is just lunacy. I mean, there's a gentleman who I took a tour of the jail here in Lane County. There's a guy here in Eugene who cycles between the street, the ER, and the jail, and he's has schizophrenia, and his manifestation is that he tends to smear feces on wherever he is when he's off his medication. So inevitably, he's going to end up at the ER, get him cleaned up, and then transfer him to the jail, where they'll medicate him at the jail, because that is our main source for helping those with severe mental illness is the jail. We've subsumed the mentally ill to the criminal class, which is just a bizarre thing for me. But anyway, so they'll medicate him, and he'll come out of his fog, right? He'll be lucid. He'll have conversations with you, and he will say, I don't want this for my life. I want to have kids and have a family and just be normal. But I leave here. I don't have access to the medication all the time. I go off of it, and I just wake up here and on this horrible Groundhog Day repeat for the past 10 years. And this is the system.
Yeah.
And to your point, we're a blue state.
Yeah.
There's an old line, show me your budget, and I'll show you your values. This is not my values. I don't imagine anybody values.
There's a lot of examples of this. I mean, I think that with homelessness, there's two things. One of them is the cap that was just put on 14%, right? It's a high cap. Well, the problem with it putting a cap at all in some ways is because now that's what landlords are going to raise the rent 14% per year, which is not going to be set for inflation. They're just going to be like, fine, if you're going to do that, we're going to do it every year. And it is, I mean, and then when we have housing, this is the role of government. Where do we step in? The rule of affordable housing or just property values. We have out-of-state investors that are coming in and buying up properties and then renting them out for the cost in like San Francisco or wherever they live.
Right.
It's difficult because we want to encourage growth and all that kind of stuff, but I don't know. I mean, we'll talk about that at the end. But yeah, I mean, it seems like some of these things that are being done. Oh, I know what I was going to say. The decriminalization of drugs. It's completely. There's reasons that we wanted to support this. And yet when it was enacted, there's one thing that was written in that's not happening. And it's the funding for treatment facilities because, we were going to do.
And drug court, right? So most people don't realize this, but for people who actually did want to get off of whatever that they were on, the only vehicle that would pay for it at the time was going through drug court. Well, if you're not charged with a crime anymore, then you don't have access to drug court, which means the drug courts went away.
Yeah.
And it just,
and that one sucks too because
it was a really bad idea.
Yeah, the political end of it is that's something that has just been attached to Democrats, even though it was voted in by the voters. And I mean, I'm sure that a lot of times it would fall on party lines, but you'd be surprised. Not you probably know a lot, but people would be surprised by the fact that libertarians, I'm sure, supported that. you know, it's in Democrats that didn't support it. I actually talked about it on the podcast where we were against it. The chair of the Democratic Party at the time, Chris Wigg, was like, dude, no. Like, this is not a good idea.
Well, he works in the trenches of it. I mean, he knows more than anybody. I mean, he and Patty Perlow were trying to ring the bell as best they could to say this is a bad idea, guys.
When the district attorney and the chair of the Democratic Party are on the same page, then that's a right. I don't know her politics, but
right,
you know, right. I mean,
but back to suicide and stuff. So the way it is now is if a really bad tragedy happens in somebody's life, someone commits suicide, there's a murder, you know, whatever. The process by which you're notified as a surviving family member is what we call second trauma, because the people who do it aren't really, you know, all in. They're very sterile. It's not a knock against them. It's a horrible job. Nobody wants to do it. You know, I've had 3 people commit suicide in my company or connected to our company since I got started. I had another fatality. The one that was downtown a year ago. She was our employee. She was going to her daughter's house, who was a former employee who just had a baby, and she was hit by a hit and run person who has had 30 moving violations and a license revoked in the past, you know, 20 some odd years or so. She'd never been on the road. Didn't even stop. Dragged her bike all the way down the street. She was called by the hospital. The whole conversation took about 45 seconds. It was just simply, your mom is dead. I'm terribly sorry. She's down here at the hospital. Can you please arrange to have her body moved in the next 48 hours? If you want some numbers, we can, you know, refer them to you. It was just, you know, just destroying your whole life, right? So, you know, when that happens to you, you know, from firsthand experience, it is devastating. Doesn't even come close to the word. There just isn't a handbook for what you're supposed to do.
Well, just traumatizing. I mean, it's traumatizing.
It's totally traumatizing, right? You know, I had a woman whose son committed suicide in his car, and he shot himself. And for whatever reason, he was moving at the time, and so he had all his personal belongings. And one of the boxes in the front seat was some of his more personal, older stuff, including his baby book. And she went into that car to get it afterward. I mean, you can imagine the level of trauma that causes, right? She didn't know that there are services out there that will do that for you, right? That will make sure everything is, you know, that will remove any evidence of what had happened. So when I joined the Suicide Prevention Coalition, I asked Roger, who runs it, who's probably one of the most chipper people I've ever met in my life, who deals in suicide every day. But I said, what's on your wish list? Like, what, if you had a magic wand, what would you bring to Lane County that we don't have? And he said, a program called TIP. It's called a Trauma Informed Program. And what they do is it's all volunteer run. It's like cahoots after something's happened. They dispatch out with 911 when something happens. Usually it's a death. They learn about everything that happened, and then they go with the death notification team. So, you know, when they're knocking on your door, the police will answer the law questions, but then they sit with you and walk you through the next hour, day, week, month of your life. You know, they can sit there and say, actually, you don't need to make those phone calls right now. You know, that's okay. You know, but if you're going to call your kids, this is how you can make that phone call. Wow. You know, this is what you can do for this. It's literally a guide for you, and it's cheap. In Lane County, it's going to cost $40,000 for the entire county for a year.
Wow.
It's nothing. It's what we spend on.
I mean, I'm sure that could be something that's raised by donations and things. I mean, and that people would be all over that. That's awesome.
We got it passed.
That's happening.
It took 2 years. And it wasn't looking very good for a while there, but we were on a phone call with a variety of different folks, kind of stakeholders, and there was kind of a push at the end to say, well, maybe we should just wait until the next budgetary cycle. And the leader asked, you know, if I had any thoughts on it, and I you know, was a little bit of a grumpier mood. So I said, you know, we haven't had a new mental health program launched in Lane County in 22 years. And it's because of conversations like this. Wow. You know, we keep pushing it down the road. So like, if we're going to be serious about launching stuff, then let's, it's $40,000 spread across like 8 municipalities. Like, write the check.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then, I mean, you had mentioned about like helping you. What do you do right when you get that news? I mean, when my mom died, and it wasn't suicide, but the first thing that I started doing was I called, because we had a joint cell phone bill, and I called Verizon, and I'm like, well, I guess you can cancel that. And to me, that was therapeutic, because I was like taking steps to like not clean up a mess, but like I just stayed active. That's the way that I was raised. Like I need to stay busy, but each person's going to be different. And wow, I think that that's an incredible organization. That's an incredible thing coming to Lane County. That's good news.
Yeah. It'll launch. It'll start taking volunteers in training in January, and they're targeting to launch in March. So in other words, basically starting in March, no other person in Lane County will ever have to go through what I went through ever again.
Wow.
For $40,000. I mean, that's the best.
Who in elected office should we give credit for? I mean, there's a lot of people, but you said some of the stakeholders. Who is it that really helped that thing get through?
Well, Lori Trieger and Heather Buck on the county commission, obviously. They were always great people to kind of do some soundboarding off of. Our police chiefs. I mean, they're the ones who have to do the notifications now. The DA's office. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Sure. Cops don't get enough credit when it comes to, I mean, and there's definitely reasons that's not what we're here to talk about, but, let's see, where were we at? I think we should talk about the recall, because anybody listening, we've talked a lot about mental health, which is great, because that's really the work that you do passionately. And I think that we're painting a picture of who you are and what you're passionate about. But I think we should talk about a recall and the growing feeling in Ward 7 that the council is not representing the residents. Now, I'm going to say the growing feeling. That's not everybody. There's just a certain group, and I'm sure that there's people that are across a broad swath in that group that have different reasons for supporting the recall. But can you explain the situation of how this recall came to be, and basically, what got us here?
Yeah, I mean, there's the on paper reason why, the very easy to track reason, and then there's kind of the undercurrent, and that's subjective. I mean, it's just my opinion. Other people may have their own.
Sure.
On paper, the issue was something called EMX, which is a planned idea to draft a new way of busing people up and down River Road. It is a kind of stage 3 of a stage 10 process. There's some federal dollars that come to the city if they do certain things, and it's kind of a combination between LTD and the city. So folks didn't want what the potential was going to lay out of the traffic would ultimately look like on River Road, and so they delivered some petitions to then Councilor Surratt, and there was kind of upset feelings about how she voted to further the study and advance the project down the line to stage 4. And so a recall was announced, and signatures were taken, and here we are.
And they were successful in recalling her. I think it's a dangerous precedent to set when you're removing someone from office based on a vote that they made, because that's what elections are for. You elect the person, and then if you don't like what they're doing, then you vote as a citizen to remove them or to vote for someone else to replace them.
To me, the more dangerous thing was how the process went down, because there's something called the SEL 350, and this is the document that if anybody files whenever you want to start taking signatures for anything, if you want to start a petition or a recall or whatever you want to do. And it's a little box that you have to describe what it is that you're doing. And that has to will then be communicated to any voter that you're having the conversation with. And it's 200 words long. It's your limit. And you have to be truthful on it. And that is so critical that you're truthful on it, because if you're not, the whole system breaks down. And the city recorder's office was supposed to check it for accuracy. We were in a transition between the old recorder and we got a new recorder, and they didn't look at it and check it for accuracy in the sense of checking it for truthfulness. And their position was, we're not the truth police. If you don't think that it's truthful, go to court and have somebody overturn it. And that is the worst possible precedent to set, because what that essentially says is I can say whatever the hell I want about you. And if you're a working class person who's in office, or you don't have a lot of means, you just have to take it on the chin. There's no, the only option is to go raise $10,000 and go fight it in court.
Yeah.
And that talk about a class system almost instantaneously, sure. Right? And I mean, at the end of the day, if I go and get a petition to say, I want to go recall you because you voted for XYZ, can I get enough people to support that? Maybe not. If I go out there and I said, I heard he's a tax cheat, or I heard he's a pedophile, am I going to be able to get enough signatures? Yes, I am.
Right.
If I can just lie about whatever the hell I want, right? So that's why that system exists, because we don't want recall after recall after recall for every little thing based on lies, because it was very easy to get the signatures, right? The threshold for recalling needs to be high. It needs to be, you have done something so egregious that telling people the honest truth about what you did create a groundswell of supporters, both at the signature stage and the verification stage, and ultimately the vote, to boot you out, right? If we lower the bar to, we can say whatever we want, then all we have is recalls. This is the new norm. And that is the most dangerous precedent that we set.
Yeah. And I mean, this is the same district that would cover the West Lane County Commissioner seat, correct? Like a part of it, because it's River Road, right? Yeah. So you see that Ryan Seneca won, and Seneca had gotten more involved, was on the school board in, I think, Junction City, I believe. So they, and there's this growing just kind of pushback against government, because they want to paint the picture like they're being the ones that aren't being heard from, when it's authoritarian type tactics that they're using, and dishonesty and misinformation.
Well, they would argue that it wasn't a party thing, that it was generally not being listened to. And I will say that I had
to be true in that.
I had solid Democrats at the door, solid Ds, who said, I'm voting for the recall. Wow. And so I think that it's the undercurrent of why we're here has more to do with kind of a general unpleasantness feeling about where we are as a city.
Absolutely. I live in I live in I mean, at that forum that we talked about, oh my gosh, and it was at Alluvium, and the crowd, the people that were there, first of all, I want to give a ton of credit, because there was people that did not come from affluent areas of Eugene, that just eloquent questioning. I mean, eloquent, thought-oriented questioning about, it was just incredible, some of the stuff that you guys were asked during that. And I was very impressed, and so it was like these people with very little that have so much engagement, and that's really good to see. Now, that being said, I think that there's just this growing frustration across every belief system in this area of Eugene, that it's like something's got to give. This direction we're heading is not good. And so, one of the things is maybe looking at new leadership, and on that. But that's what you're here for. You wanted to put your name in the hat. What is it that made you want to step up to this? Obviously, this is going to be a huge challenge, because you're going to be, first of all, is it like a few months that you'll be in office before you then have to start campaigning if you get seated, because the appointment,
the most scrutinized city council seat probably ever.
Right. And it's just a news story. Yeah.
The person has to turn right around and start campaigning the day after. They make their appointment choice on December 12th. December 13th, you're knocking on doors.
Yeah.
All the way up to May. And then if there's more than a few people who run in May and you don't get 50%, then the top two go on to November. And then the following May, you got to run again for a full term. So this is a solid year or more that you're committing yourself to.
Yeah. So when there's a vacant seat, city council will then vote. For anybody that's unaware, then we'll vote to, choose the appointment to fill the seat. And I originally intended on having you and Huela Oboa on, and then that's not the only applicants now. There's like 10, and I'm just not going to have time, And so the reason that I had you on is because you won the straw poll at the event that we hosted, and because I was impressed. And I've talking to friends of mine behind the scenes. I think there's a belief that you were probably, this is very difficult to quantify, but you're probably the most qualified of the applicants in what we were talking about. We believe that's the case.
Sure.
There's some great applicants, but we'll see where the city council wants to go with it. The interesting thing about a group of people that want to recall someone, and like you had said, it wasn't probably done. It was across political lines and whatnot, but I mean, it was done by one group that was organizing it. That's for sure. But that being said, the interesting thing is what I've learned from doing this podcast, we were talking about school board removing, if they remove the superintendent, it backs you up 18 months. You don't get back up to where you were for 18 months, roughly, and also when it comes to removing someone that holds the seat, then you allow that person that's now the replacement, not voted by the city, voted by the council, now becomes an incumbent in the next election, and incumbents win at like 80% clip. So all of the, I think it's going to be changing a little bit. We'll see locally, but I mean, it's an interesting strategy where it's like, so you think this town is, we'll just say right and left for just because it's simple. So this town's too liberal, too left, and you want to remove someone from office. Now what you're doing is allowing the liberal majority to pick the replacement. And I don't think that you fit that description of being somebody that's just one-sided, but I'm just saying.
And what I would say is, to be like objective, they would say that it wasn't about party, and that in fact, they maligned the idea that we should be bringing in, a particular political bent into it. I tell people I'm a proud Democrat. The first thing that I tell people is that the idea behind the Democratic Party, there's a difference between national party and what that is, right? So like,
absolutely,
if you're a political junkie, then you'll make that connection. You want to make that connection, but honestly, all it is a statement of values. When I tell people I'm a Democrat, that means that I have a list of values you're most likely to be able to guess, for working families and for union rights and for teachers. I mean, right out of the gate, right? That just starts the conversation, but that doesn't end the conversation unless you want it to. And the feeling that I think that is going on in Ward 7 is that, are there going to be people who are not going to vote for me purely because out of party politics? Sure. Are those a good chunk of those going to be people from the recall? Probably, right? But those are going to be the people that I'm going to be able to move the needle on. I'm going to try to, but for me, it's about getting back to the basics. And that's where I think we're missing it in Ward 7, and frankly, around the city. Like, in my decision to run, I decided to go and knock on 150 doors in every one of the neighborhoods in Ward 7. So I knocked on 600 doors. And I asked, if you take out homelessness, drugs, and transportation off of the list, what are the next things on your list that you are concerned about, right? So you take the temperature down because you're not going to be talking about EMX, you're not going to be talking about homelessness, right? What's the next things on the list? And it wasn't one particular topic, but it was definitely one theme that rose to the top very quickly. And it was the fundamentals of what we expect for what we pay for in taxes. Up in the Santa Clara neighborhood, they in all the alcohol streets, it's like Corbel and Chardonnay, and they built all these brand new subdivisions, which are great and beautiful, but the city didn't put in stop signs at four-way stops, and there's no street lights. So people are careening into each other, right? Because we didn't do that, right? So like the pothole doesn't get fixed. There's glass in the bike causeway over on River Road. The little things that people expect from the city and thus from their city councilors aren't getting done, and so they feel like when they look at the council, I could get with you on the issues that you want me to go with you on. But if I can't see that the most basic things are getting done, I'm not going to be with you on those things, and you're not hearing me.
Sure. It's just lip service at that point,
service, right? So,
and I think that go ahead.
I spent 12 years in Chicago. If you go onto the website of an alderman and then go onto a website for a city council, they're totally different. Now, granted, they also pay their alderman about $90,000 a year, so maybe we should try doing that. And you get what you pay for, But nonetheless,
and real quick, you mean that because it's nothing. Like here, it's like city council gets nothing, and I don't think people understand that.
I mean, it's like $1,000 a month for essentially a full-time job.
Yeah,
so like you want, as a city, you want a professional city council, then you need to pay professionally. That's just the way it works. I mean, count yourself lucky. We only have a certain amount of counselors here. We have I think it's 80 aldermen in Chicago.
Wow. It's a huge city,
a huge city, right? But if you go onto an alderman's webpage, it's all about how can the alderman help you with whatever the city needs that you have a need for. The leaves need to be picked up. The snow hasn't come by. My garbage hasn't been picked up. How can I help you navigate the city bureaucracy to get what you want done? I mean, is there a spot that says, come learn about Dan and his background? Sure. But honestly, no one's logging on to the, Isaacson for city council website for me. No one cares. I mean, they care about the leaves that are outside that need to be picked up.
It's just the podcaster that's about to interview. That's the only people.
Right. So our websites, at least for me in Ward 7, I'm going to be building one that will be very much like that. The idea being that you can log into this to Dan Isaacson council member, whatever it is going to be .com, and say what it is that you're needing from the city, what problem you're not getting resolved, and you can open a ticket system just like you would for tech support, and it'll be public for you and me and for everyone else. And so I can see that sitting there ticking off at a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, that hasn't been resolved. And so the onus is on me to help facilitate you getting through and getting that at least some answer back, right? Because it's frustrating when you just send an email off into the ethos and you don't get a response back. And it's like, okay, well, I'm paying taxes, I'm emailing people, I'm never getting a response back. And now they want this from me, whatever this is. You're not going to get an answer. The answer is to be no. There's no trust there. So you need to get back to the fundamentals. You need to start getting that stuff down, and then from there build on it. That's what I want for this area.
Yeah. So I want to talk about accessibility of local candidates in a second. We got a comment from where are we at? Oh, from Sarah Schofield. She says Dan gets shit done. Hire him.
Love Sarah.
This is an easy one. We're not reaching out to the voter. We're reaching out to a small group of people, and I would imagine that they'll watch this. So hopefully they take your. Well, I actually think there's some great candidates across the board. I want that to be clear. Thomas is one of my best friends. He's put his name in the hat as well. And so, I mean, it would be really difficult for me to tell him face to face that I didn't vote for him. So I'm glad I live in Springfield. But she
brings up the part that I think needs to be discussed a lot, which is that you're hiring someone to do a job.
100%. I
mean, even if it's $1,000, you're still paying someone to do a job. So instead of voting for a person, hire somebody. Put on an HR hat.
Yeah. You had talked in the forum about accessibility and how you wanted to have a time set where people can come and have one-on-one discussions with you. Yeah. Talk about why that's something that you're willing to open up.
So when I joined the Planning Commission, there was a little bit of an onboarding process, but the way it was explained to me was you're going to get emails from people, and it could be one email on one day and 20 emails on the next, and then nothing for a month. Read them. Retain the information, file them away, move on. I came from a different world of civic engagement and constituent relations. Every single person who emailed us got something back from me, either a phone call or an email or a letter, especially during HB 2001, which was highly contentious. My detractors aren't thrilled with the level of debate and the full throated defense that I have of certain issues. I think it's healthy in a democracy. I don't hate anybody I disagree with. And when I would call people, my purpose was not to change their view or to tell them they're wrong. Most of the time it's to say, how did you arrive at your thought process on this? And this is how I arrived at mine. If there's some symmetry we can get to on that, great. But this is where I'm kind of coming from. And most of the time I don't have my mind made up until I walk in a room. and they can help craft that or help me solidify it, right? But it became pretty apparent from the conversations I was having at the door during the recall that people weren't feeling seen. And there's a difference between being seen and heard. But if I could just solve that equation, right, the outcome still may have been the same during the recall, right? If the tables had turned and I was in office and they dropped off the same petition and I voted the same way, I don't think the fervor would have been as and the heat would have been as strong if people had a way to get in touch with me, sit down, put their finger in my face and say, I disagree with you wholeheartedly, and this is why, and I can say why I disagree with them. And they left with at least it's saying, I disagree with him, but he heard what I had to say and he acknowledged me, and right now I don't feel that people feel like they're being acknowledged. And that is the most basic thing I can do that you're hiring me to do. And if that just means putting in office hours together once a week, then that's what I'll do. So I'm going to bounce between the different neighborhoods. We'll pick a spot and make it the same spot every week. And allow people to come in and tell me whatever they're thinking, whatever their thoughts are.
Yeah, like a town hall style. Let me know if there's any way I can help with that, because I'd like to. And
I think we should have more town halls, like generally like host it. I think it'd be great.
I think that the alluvium thing, that was something that I learned, because I do think some of it needs to be remote. Some of it, there's benefits to both. I know that some people don't have access to the internet or good enough internet or whatever, but there's also people that don't have access to the time that want it to be on the internet. Yeah. Like it could have been an email, or it could have been, and so that people are busy. And so I think we need to kind of find a hybrid model that works for everybody. Well, that's really good. I want to talk about the three biggest issues that you had said. I like how you said that when you went around talking to people. You said remove affordable housing, homelessness, drugs, and transportation. What's the fourth one? But let's talk about those three. Yeah. First of all, we talked about transportation. Let's start with that, because of the fact that that's what got us in the recall. At least that was the thing that people put their finger on about the MX. I personally am a huge fan of the MX as far as what it's done in, I think that connecting Eugene and Springfield and whatnot, it's from the Springfield station to campus is incredibly improved with the MX, but there's potholes and all that. And I think that one of the things we can talk about, I think the roads bill was passed, right? So that's a continuation.
Overwhelmingly, which is great, because we started with a $200 million hole of repairs that we needed, and we basically been chipping away at it. And this was when this is over with, we'll have about the last 50 million to go. But if you look at where all those road projects go, we have 43% more road project dollars slated for Ward 7 than the average ward in Eugene from that road bond.
Wow.
So you could argue that those dollars are needed because the roads are being used more. And if they're being used more, obviously they have more wear and tear and more need, right? So, we did a study in the city that was how many people were going to be moving to Eugene over the next 20 years. So we're 10 years in. And the thought was we needed 18,000 units of housing because there were going to be about 36,000 people moving here. And we are 10 years in. So how'd we do on the projection? Well, we were exactly spot on. We grew 18,000 people and we built 9,000 units of housing, right on the 50% mark. The problem is that most of those housing was student housing, right? Which doesn't help you if you're, needing a single family house, right? And so part of the problem is the next 10 years, another 18,000 people are moving here, and we need another 9,000 units of housing in addition to the shortfall that we already have. So where are those houses physically going to get built, right? Yeah. It's not going to get built in the South Hills. It's not going to be built up Coburg Road. It's going to be built in two sections. It's going to be built in Santa Clara and Upper River Road, and it's going to be built out on West 11th. That's where it's going to be built. And West 11th is a nightmare. Because we have that's where we put all our industry. That's why we have it's why we have the noise vibration issue that just became before the Zippo log issue before city council, right? So if you don't want to live next to the industry that's going to be doing the third shift at 3:00 in the morning, then maybe Santa Clara is where we're going to be needing to go. So if you think the traffic's bad by Beltline now, wait till you add 18,000 people here in the next 10 years, right? And every person that we can convince, not force, but every person that we can convince to use public transportation takes another car off the road, takes another option off the road. And I don't understand how that's a bad thing, a bad idea. I will say that the EMX plan itself is not finalized. I haven't seen one. I have never even received a briefing on it. And when it comes up, we'll deal with it. But I've seen an idea that someone was floating by not too long ago about just turning the middle lane of River Road into the EMX. So you wouldn't have two lanes. You'd only have it one way. So the bus would make one big circle, have to come on the Beltline and they go straight down. So you wouldn't lose a lane of traffic on River Road. But I will tell you that, the biggest detractors that were against EMX were also some of the people who were against the Willamette expansion. And the Willamette expansion, when it all got said and done, only slowed traffic by 9 seconds, but it reduced the average speed by 40%. And
yeah, I live in Springfield, and the Main Street Safety Project was scoffed at because people are unwilling to think forward. That's like, we could talk about progressivism. People don't want change a lot of times. So they're like, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. But they don't have they're not thinking about the logic about where we're heading. And I love what you're talking about with, like, look at these housing numbers. Where are those houses going to go? Like, that's just, and it's not the issue that you're talking specifically. I think it's that you're showing logic. That it's like we actually need to be thinking about this 10 years down the road, not just a fancy quote.
Whether you build it or not.
Exactly. And it's gonna, and then we're gonna be like, why didn't you guys do anything about this?
Right.
So I mean, the Main Street Safety Project was completely, everybody that was running in Springfield was like cowering about, oh no, I don't support that. I don't support that. And I mean, it takes
I live right on River Road, and it is a drag strip. I mean, we have I would love, and I don't know how this is. Maybe I'll talk to Chief Skinner about just putting up one of the speedometers to track what the average speed the traffic is on River Road. I would bet money. I bet you all the money in my pockets versus all the money in your pockets that the average speed is about 20% higher than the posted speed limit. This is the second most deadly street in Eugene is River Road. We have fatality every year. There was a fatality outside my house 2 years ago. I work with the city and ARCO, our community organization, to get a lit crosswalk being installed next month there. But it is not by any means a safe. I have a 5-year-old. I wouldn't take him on River and let him.
No, I mean, I know I live in Springfield on Main Street. Yeah, off of Main Street. It's the same thing. It's like people. I don't like those crosswalks either. Like I know that this was not the resolution you want. I mean, I know you worked behind the scenes to get it done, and I think that's great because it helps. But where people hit the button, they can't see that it says to walk. They just hit the button, and then they automatically go, and people get a red light, and it's blinking so that you can proceed once it's clear, which is a judgment call that people can make because, anyway, we could be here forever. We don't have a ton of time, so we got to move on. But I mean, the transportation stuff, I just like, my takeaway from what you just said is that I like that you're using logic and that you're looking forward and that you're thinking about things. There's going to be things people are just going to not like that later on. They're gonna be like, what, turns out this is actually decent. So it's difficult. How to we have to educate. That's what I'm doing, what I do, because at least we can bring people on where they're going to like, I didn't think about that perspective instead of just reading a Register Guard article or something like that. Sarah has another comment. She's says getting more shit done. Forward thinking is what Eugene needs, especially us out here in Santa Clara. I 100% agree. So let's talk about fentanyl, and then we'll talk. I mean, I don't even know what more can be said about housing. It's obvious that we need more housing, more affordable housing. And I'm happy to hear that you're at least alarmed with the fact that the only thing we're adding is student housing. That's not going to fix the problem. But I've talked on this podcast. Go ahead.
One last thing on housing, just as a quick thing. So the part of the problem is, and I don't get me wrong, I think government has its great place, but I think sometimes government can kind of screw things up by trying to do too much. It muddies it, right? I have a friend of mine who is a developer, and I've had lunch with him, asked him, why what from your perspective, why are we here? What can we do from a city's perspective to grease the wheels and get more housing done? And he said, the problem is that if I had two projects in front of me, one that the city wanted me to build some low affordable housing, and one a regular normal project. Both of you guys had $300,000 in your account. Wire me. Which project am I going to do? He said, I'm doing the regular one every day of the week, every day. I said, why? And he said that the reason is that all the hoops I got to jump through to deal with the city to build the affordable housing project versus the other one. He said, honestly, if the city was serious about it, they would just put someone on the project, made them the lead, let them deal with all the forms, all this stuff, and just hire me, the contractor, to do contracting. That's what my job is.
Right.
That's what I signed up to do. I'm not a nonprofit lead. I'm not there to fill out forms, and just pay me to do my job. And then I would choose more of those projects. So I think there's ways, if we just turn the prism a little bit, and start listening to folks, and again, hearing what they're having to say, I think that we can kind of grease the wheels to get more things done.
Well, I think it's important for people to understand too, that you have to think about building stuff that taxpayers live in. So you have to have, I know that in Springfield that there's the Mohawk, I can't remember what it's called, but there's new middle to upper income housing development. And people were like, what about low income housing? And it's like the argument is that when you create higher income housing, lower income housing becomes available because people that are going up in life. And people are like, what about the people that don't have anything? And it's like, we have to do both. We have to do both because we have to have opportunities for tax revenue to pay for the programs that the people that don't have money are going to be utilizing. That's just the truth. Like, people don't like to hear that because they don't like to think about the truth of the fact that tax revenue is what funds a lot of the programs. And it comes from the people that have, the ability to be taxed, basically, and the people that don't have incomes. Some of it is, it's just obvious, and people don't want to have that conversation.
We're very bad as a species at identifying exponential growth of an existential threat.
Yeah.
So, it grows very slow. We don't want to admit that it's there.
Yeah. So now drugs and fentanyl. Fentanyl is something, I don't know how this is possible, but one of the things that I'd like to do with fentanyl is it possible, or I want to hear what you have to say, and I'm totally workshopping this. I have no idea how this would even look. I'd like to do a special on fentanyl. I'd like to talk to different people in the community that are affected by what it's doing in our streets, killing teens, killing people, killing
that first responders who touch them.
Exactly. It's similar to the stuff that they use in Russia to poison Putin's enemies, and so, but I want to change the classification from fentanyl being from a street drug, because there's obviously medical uses and whatnot. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about on the street. Mm-hmm. I want to change the classification because we've decriminalized drugs. And I think we need to relook at that, because I don't think certain drugs should be included on that list where it's decriminalized. And I think fentanyl is one of them, where it's like, if you're caught with a lot of fentanyl, that's manslaughter. You're literally, the intent is to poison drugs. That's the irony of it, is that people are using fentanyl to make other drugs more powerful and more potent. And they know that there's a high risk, that the person that they give that to may not live through it. They only care about, you're talking about.
I'm right there with you. I've always been against Measure 110. I think it's really bad public policy, and we're seeing the effects of it every day. But the voters at large, voted it in. So I think that we'll have to have a conversation with them. My feeling is, I don't want to punish somebody who has an addiction. I want to hold them responsible for treatment. I'm not just because you have an illness. If you have an issue with your kidney, and you, God forbid, you need dialysis, it's your job to get to the dialysis center, right? You got to figure out a way to get there, right? So in the same sense here. So if you have an alcohol affliction or a drug addiction, putting you in prison doesn't solve that. And so I want there to be a ton of wraparound services that can help you, provided that you want to take ownership in your own disease. If you're supplying that, if you're part of the machine that facilitates that toxic aspect of our society, I want you buried under the prison.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's criminal. I mean, it's like knowingly. There's people that I think it's manslaughter. I mean, there was always rumors when I was young about acid, where they're like, "Oh my gosh, a sheet of acid, every hit is one manslaughter charge," which I don't think is true. I think it was definitely situational, because back in the day it was all over the place, because it was the tail end of the hippie movement in Eugene. So that stuff was there. And I saw 16, 17, 18-year-old friends of mine that got arrested with LSD. And they didn't spend. We're like, who did you write up? Because we didn't know. I personally don't know a lot about the judicial system, because I never had to get tied up in it, because I was pretty fortunate. There was, anytime things got bad, there would be a dust cloud where Patrick used to be. I'm like, I'm out of here.
Well, it's weird being, I'm in the marijuana industry, and it's weird because I had never even used marijuana when I was in college in Eugene. In fact, my last job I had before I left for Chicago, I worked for the Papa John's out on Division, and at the time
that's the marijuana industry too, though. No,
well, we had a manager who put a glass jar in the office, and sometimes we'd have customers who would pay us in cannabis, and then we just go put it in the jar, and our manager at the end of the week would make it disappear, and then spread the proceeds around. That was my experience.
Wow. So usually I don't go past an hour, but I want to hear more about that. I want to talk about, if you're down, if you're okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about what it is that you do. You say you work in the cannabis industry, but talk about what specifically that is.
I own a part owner of 2 farms and a co-packing business. The co-packing business is in the Whitaker neighborhood. We've been there for 3 years now, and I employ about 35 people. It's a good industry in the sense that it's growing, it's maturing. It's a bunch of startups. It's bad in industry, and if you're looking for stability, or there's some bad people too, and the rules are just really antiquated. I mean, everything is cash, and there are problems. I mentioned at the beginning of the program, that how I got back to Oregon. I trusted a friend that I knew in college, and was essentially lied to, and as was everyone who I work with, who gave up their lives in retirement. And I gave up a really great job that was high paying, and invested all of my retirement, and parents' retirement, and all that kind of stuff. And ultimately it was found to be one big lie. And by the time you figure it out, you've already left your job, and they've already replaced it, and you're going down a hill. So you got to figure something out. So we fought a pretty public battle in Cresswell for to open up a dispensary there, and I'm glad that the vote went the way it did, because it really kind of shined a light on who we had kind of settled ourselves up with. And when we finally untangled ourselves from him, we had a meeting in May of 2018 to decide whether or not to just walk away, or whether to kind of keep going. And so for 5 years or so, we've worked pretty much without a paycheck to get people paid off. We started about $8.1 million in debt, which is, when you don't have, a whole lot to kind of right the ship with, and you're looking at that kind of debt, it's pretty dramatic. But we did debt reductions and sold off assets, and we've got it down to about 2 million now. And what I told people is, as long as I'm here working every day, along with Kat and Peter and PJ and Larry and everyone else, I can't guarantee you're going to make money on your investment, but I'm going to do my best to get your money back. And that's hard, because, especially when you go into politics, because people will use that as the basis to try to attack you for it. And
it's so nuanced. There's so much that goes into it. I mean, there, like you said, a partnership with somebody that's not, wasn't being forthcoming. I mean, it's just, I don't know.
I had somebody who asked me just yesterday. They said, that they were doing an interview, and they said, well, can we really trust that your intentions on city council are going to be for the people, not to enrich yourself? And I went, I haven't seen anybody how they can enrich out of out of city council.
Out of city council, that's like you're gonna be able to make like stock market backdoor deals and stuff,
right?
Yeah.
It's hard because what I tell people is, I'm glad I made that decision in 2018. I'm still glad that we're making do and taking care of the people that we said we were going to take care of a lot longer than I wish. But the result of that was, pushing a friend of mine to the point where he needed to feel like he needed to kill himself. And I have to live with that the rest of my life, so would I have made the same decision if I knew everything? No, I would have walked. Everyone I knew told me to walk. But I can't. I can only wake up and try to find the strength to keep getting through another day. Some days are good and some days are really bad. Anniversaries suck, and he has 3 kids. They're wonderful, wonderful boys, but they're older and they go through some of their own problems. And you're reminded every day of a decision that you made that you're gonna be haunted with. And so for me, I hope that my story is one, like I said at the very beginning, I'm not an expert in mental health stuff, but I am an expert in my own personal story, and because I was there, and it's one that I think that people can kind of learn from. If all you want is a bunch of leaders who seemingly have never made any mistakes, have had smooth sails and everything went right for them, then you're just asking for a leader to lie to you. And that's just not me. So I'm willing to put my name forward and let the chips fall where they may.
One, and to be clear, we're not talking about the people on city council. There's great people on city council, and obviously those are the people that you're applying for their vote. So Randy Groves, I had the honor to chat with him a couple of weeks ago. Gosh, it was just one of my favorite conversations I've had in a long time. And I pinch myself that I get to do this and get to talk to people like yourself. And I know that I shouldn't, because we're just citizens. We're just people. It's just that I never saw myself doing something like this platform. It's something that I can share stories and elevate voices in the community. Something I've always wanted to do. And I finally have found a way to do that. So this has been a pleasure, like all episodes that I do, to get to know you better. And now I know that I can reach out because I know that you're doing a lot behind the scenes. I mean, Sarah is somebody that I respect mightily, and her exact quote, "He gets shit done." So I think that's a pretty good endorsement. Daniel Isaacson, it's been an honor, and it'll be interesting to see. December 12th is when the council will vote.
Yep.
But I think that you had kind of hinted at this, and it's going to be the last thing we'll get out of here. But I mean, you would kind of, this is what people do in campaigns. They talk about when elected, this is what I'm going to do, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I think that your plan is that if you do get the appointment, that you will be running again. I think you already had it, because I know that sometimes with appointments, it's a holdover, and that is the case in many cases where people are like, okay, you'll hold this position for a little bit of time and then we'll have an open seat. But
you touched on this a little bit ago about how the superintendent race, the recalling him sets you back 18 months. You have to, there's a momentum that you have to have in an office. And I don't think that it does a good job for the citizens of Ward 7 to have a really high turnover of in this case, 6 months. No. Whether you like Claire or not, she has a tremendous amount of institutional memory that nobody who the council could choose is going to fill that role. Right. So you've lost that. And that's going to take time to build that up. So I can only hope that the people who are open to hearing an argument of someone to help lead this ward, can come from me and hear my argument and grade me on the job they're hiring me to do on the next 6 months. What can I accomplish in 6 months that I'm willing to commit to? Did I do it? Then, we'll talk about the next 6 months and the next 6 months after that, and just keep going along.
Yeah. Well, good luck with everything, and we'll see how it goes. I do like the idea. I mean, we haven't lost that completely because she's accessible. You can reach out to her and ask her, and then I hope that you will do that if appointed, and then I hope you will also do what you were talking about with having town halls and hear from the people that were siding with the recall.
That'd be great.
So that we can find some kind of copacetic progress moving forward. So Daniel Isaacson, thank you so much. This has been a real treat.
Totally. Thank you.